Romain Grosjean will be feeling pretty sick. A very, very good drive at the Italian Grand Prix and then disqualification after the race. But we should see it in the context of this part has been on the car since, what, the Canadian Grand Prix. So in that sense, was it performance enhancing? Of course it was, in the sense that they wouldn't have done it if it wasn't. But on the other side of the coin, we should see Romain's drive still for what it was, a good drive relative to races since Canada. But having said all of that, Scarbs, what is your take on it all?
Well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. It's a very small area of the car, and yeah, you're right, there is a performance advantage, but it isn't the difference between the pace of the Renault and the Haas on any particular given day. And this is where the whole argument has come about. So Haas have updated their car massively over the past few races.
As you've been saying, actually.
So we've had, you know, aspects of the front wing, the barge boards, the floor, the diffuser. And before we carry on, let's make it quite clear, this is Haas development. This isn't Ferrari. This has got no link whatsoever to Ferrari.
And nor is it a Dallara manufacturing issue either.
Yeah, and exactly. So we'll come to this. So Haas updated their floor, and one of the aspects of it is what we call the T-tray, the splitter, the flat section that sticks out underneath the raised section of the chassis. Now, the regulations demand that the front edge of this is radiused by sort of 25 millimetres each side, just so that you've got a soft edge. And teams do this in various ways, and some of them are...
Can I just stop you there? Is that purely for aerodynamic reasons, or is it for also safety reasons? They don't want a sharp edge there, perhaps?
I think it's more safety reasons rather than an aerodynamic performance, because teams used to literally just run that just as a very simple piece of carbon fibre. Obviously, that area has now become hugely complex, packed in behind the barge boards and all the other turning vanes around it. So you've got this little radius, and teams do this in various ways. Some of them literally just have a little piece of almost wire just creating that radius, and then further back you have the sharp edges. I've not had a chance to get a very clear look at the Haas's updated versions. Just simply haven't got the photography. Clearly Renault have had a look at this and said, well, the radius there isn't quite right. This was raised some time ago. Now, Haas have been speaking to the FIA about this over a number of weeks. And this is where we're getting some miscommunication between Haas and the FIA, speaking to Nick Tombazes and obviously Charlie Whiting as to what is allowed. There was a technical directive before the summer break that said exactly what was and wasn't allowed in this area. And the teams were given until Monza to make the change. Now, Haas's argument was, yes, we understand that, but we've got the summer break and we then have the manufacturing to change this area of the car. Now, it's not just simply a lump of carbon fibre. You've obviously got the aerodynamic effect. You've got stiffening structures inside there as well. So that it's not something that you can just take a file to and round off a little bit more, because there's far more involved in this. The FIA had conversations with Haas and said, well, if you turn up with this flaw at Monza, you will be open to protest, including that's what Renault have done. They're in a very tight race between them. Renault couldn't do it before because they were given dispensation, all the teams were given dispensation till Monza to make this change. Haas didn't. And they were protested, and quite correctly were disqualified from the race for not meeting the regulations there.
Now, is that because do you think that is because Haas misinterpreted the advice they were given by, say, Nick Tombazes, or because they felt it was definitely legal, or because they were just behind the 8 ball in terms of what they wanted to do?
All we have so far is the FIA press release, and if we take that at face value, we've got no reason not to, because obviously that's been taken from all the conversations and the email chains that have gone through this. Haas said that they would struggle to have it ready for Monza because of production issues. So initially, they thought it was justified in its design. The FIA have subsequently created this technical directive that said, no, that won't be the case, you need to change it, and that may have affected other teams. We're not entirely sure. Obviously, it's not something that they announce massively, making these detailed changes. So I think it's very much this ball was in Haas's court to solve by Monza, and they didn't, and obviously they've paid the penalty in what is a very tight championship race with them and Renault.
And just to wrap that up, the sharp edge relative to the radius presumably generates some vortices that the radius wouldn't, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, so what happens is the splitter, the T-tray, is down at what they call the reference plane. So this is the lowest aspect of the car before the plank bolts underneath it. And this affects the step that goes underneath the car. And by creating vortices in this area, you keep the airflow attached to the step, and that means that the diffuser works so much better. So sharp edges give you nice vortices. Teams have been playing this area since... I mean, when did they first have a raised nose cars? You know, since the 90s. None of this is new. It's just their particular interpretation of that front edge. There will be, the reason they make it that shape is for some performance, but you're talking about, points of downforce, not tenths of seconds over, their rivals.
And sorry, one more question. Is that's obviously a part of the car that also hits the road or can hit the road.
Exactly.
So how does this affect rake versus non-rake cars and ride heights in general? Or is there any relationship to it?
The teams would treat this slightly differently because obviously the angle of that surface is going to be quite different by several degrees between a raked car and an unraked car. And obviously if you've got a raked car, and to some extent even the non-rake ones, they do run this front of the splitter right on the floor. You see the spark, particularly at Monza when as soon as they go onto the curbs, that area is just sparking constantly, which shows you the level of titanium that's underneath there. It's also subject to deflection tests. So again, it's not an area that you can change quickly, but it is highly influential on the airflow on the rest of the car.